Welcome to the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. You are about to listen to an episode of the Audio Signals podcast with Marco Ciappelli. In this new season, Audio Signals is repositioning its antennas, focusing not just on the stories, but on the storytellers. In our modern hybrid analog-digital society, the art of storytelling has never been more vital or displayed such a diverse array of forms. Recognizing this, our conversations will spotlight the narrators, providing a unique exploration into the minds behind the narratives. From authors to podcasters, visual artists to songwriters, and everything in between, we will engage with all who contribute to this extraordinary tapestry of human experience. We are all made of stories, after all.
Hello, everybody. This is Marco Ciappelli on Audio Signals podcast. As you know, I recently repositioned the antennas to capture some different stories. And it's not that they're different. I think they are a little bit more in depth because I like now to talk about the stories and about the storytelling art in general, and the storytellers themselves, because there is a reason why they write certain things instead of others. There are different kind of authors. And also, it's not just about books, it's about writing songs, any kind of art. I mean, we're made of stories. I always like to say that from an anthropological and sociological perspective. And today couldn't be any more fitting to have this guest that I'm going to introduce shortly, because he not only writes, he wrote a lot of book, almost a movie, but he will tell us about that. And he teaches how to write. So, I mean, I can't be happier about the conversation that we're about to have. So for those watching the video, you can see Gary Braver is here with me. And for those listening, just 1 second, and you're going to hear his voice. So, Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marco. Nice being with you.
It's a pleasure to have you. So let's start from the beginning. Let's start with you, and then we'll go into the stories. So who is Gary for the people that haven't read your book, which I know there are many. So hopefully somebody in the audience will be familiar with who you are. But for those that aren't, who is Gary?
Well, Gary is a professor, actually a former professor at Northeastern University. I retired last year to write full-time. I have written 10 novels. This is the 10th novel, Rumor of Evil. And most of the earlier books were standalones, medical thrillers. Even though I don't have a background in medicine, I have a background in physics. And I know how to ask questions to get me from point A to point B and make me sound like I know what I'm talking about. So I have for 40 years been teaching Frankenstein in a science fiction course, which is one of the first taught in a college level. And it is essentially the theme of so much science fiction, watch out what you wish for. So I had written a novel called Rough Beast, which was really focused on a town nearby where I lived that had carcinogens in the water, and it affected people. It ticked up the cancer rate in the area. So it gave me the idea to write a book. My wife and I had children and didn't want to have anything poisoning our kids' bodies. So I wrote a book called Rough Beast about something bad getting in the water and a cover-up that goes right to the White House. And that did quite well. So the publisher said, give us more of the same. And I said, more of the same what? They said, high concept scientific breakthrough novels that focus on the family, have strong female characters. And that, a sidebar to that, Marco, is that about 70 to 80% of all the books, fictional books in America are purchased by women. So women like to read about strong women. So that gave birth to a lot of other books, and this one is the first of a detective series. Rumor of Evil is the first of a detective series that I just started. The second one is done, and the first one just came out last week, Rumor of Evil. So now I'm writing detective series. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And I already have a couple of questions, and I'm going to start with this, going back to how you started.
Sure.
And I was reading your bio, and yes, the teaching part, but you also went to some scuba diving and research in the ocean, and that's kind of like how got you started. And so you wrote archaeological novel, and then medical inspired novel, and then thriller. You teach horror. So where I'm going with this is, when somebody is a writer, people may think, you can write anything. I'm just going to go there and say, hey, write more of this, or this is the new fashion, the trend in the book nowadays. So why don't you just go ahead and write that? But you got to write what you're comfortable with and when you're inspired by. Let's start with that. Like, how did you feel inspired to start with that? Was it connected, of course, with your life, I guess, what you were doing?
Right. I had known from college that I wanted to write fiction. And the only way to write fiction was to teach college. So I got advanced degrees in English. And I started teaching at Northeastern, and I was, enamored of many books, many short stories, and I was chomping at the bit to write my own, but I did not have a story. So in the late 70s, I signed up for a scuba diving expedition, a scientific expedition to Mallorca, Spain. And we were there for 3 days because there were reports of 2nd century BC Roman wrecks and maybe Phoenician wrecks. And we were about a mile offshore, and an ancient shipwreck. There's no wood left, of course, but there are ballast stones which rolled around the belly of the ship to keep it stable. And we were fanning away amphoras, large pottery that held seeds and beans and olive oil and wine. And we were clearing away the sand and pulling up these artifacts. And our boat was 30 feet above us with a red and white diver flag, and a speedboat cut across our bubbles. Once, it's an accident. Twice, you're not paying attention. 3, 4, 5, 10 times, we're in danger. And the boat came at us. He was dragging anchor hooks like this at 20 miles an hour, trying to hook us and pull us out to sea to drown. I said, if I get out of this alive, I'm going to write a book about him. What we found out was that a local godfather on Mallorca was diving on ancient wrecks and selling the booty to collectors and museums all over the world. And that gave me the idea. I just moved the whole story to Santorini, and the Aegean island, where I spent some summers. And that became the first novel called Atlantis Legend, connected to Plato's Atlantis legend. And that did well. And the other books followed after that. But then they became kind of medical thrillers, as I mentioned earlier.
Right. Yeah. But there's always an inspiration for that, right? I mean, you said that the story about the monster was connected to something that happened there. So you see that. And how do you transmit this to your student? You teach us about how to write horror or how to write mystery, but if you don't have it, do you just wake up one day and say, all right, I'm going to write in horror? I don't think I could.
Well, it depends on your experience too. I mean, it's
right.
How I translate that to my students. I mean, I taught fiction writer for a long time. I can take a mediocre writer and make them a good writer by, schooling them and having them practice and giving them feedback. I cannot take a good writer and make them a great writer. And I always tell my students, you come up with your own ideas, whatever the genre, mystery, thriller, horror, mainstream. I can help you as you write it. As a child, as an adolescent, I saw lots of science fiction, horror, and cop movies. So that was kind of ingrained in me. And I taught courses in detective fiction also. So I was enamored of the genre. But the medical thriller part really came out of teaching science fiction, watch out what you wish for message. The last novel I co-wrote with Tess Gerritsen, a best-selling author, and it did very, very well. And So it was suggested to me write my own detective series, and so that's where Rumor of Evil came from. And it was just, the next one is done. You keep the same characters, so it makes it a little bit easier because the main characters you continue with. But it's just, that's what I like to read. That's what I like to watch when I was younger, and that's what I like to write, either thriller or mystery.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Now, I do have a question. Now, you have an experience I mentioned at the beginning where you were kind of given the option for a movie. So that's kind of like every writer dreams nowadays, right? I mean, if you make that, you get an entire different industry that may even be more, of course, money speaking, more valuable than writing, although writing is a wonderful career. How does that work, and how does that change the way you write? Meaning, some people may envision already a movie out of it, and also they use certain visual that may be adapted. But do you feel like you kind of change the nature of your writing if you have that in mind versus this is a book, it's a story written. If it works for a movie, good. We'll change it a little bit.
Just as you said, Mark, I mean, I from having watched so many movies, I have a cinematic imagination. I see it playing on the inside of my skull, and I usually take dictation and I write the scenes. I don't think about, well, I fantasize about having a movie. And when Ridley Scott optioned Elixir 20 years ago and then re-optioned it, I thought we were in writer heaven. This is going to become a movie, and all the wonderful things that could happen since then. He passed on it after two options to make Hannibal the follow-up to Silence of the Lambs, which did not do very well, and Jodie Foster bowed out of that in the role she had in the first movie. So I don't think about that anymore. I mean, we came close. I could almost smell the popcorn in the theaters, but we didn't get a movie out of it. We got enough money to send my two kids to the first years of college, so that worked out.
That's good. Yeah.
But in terms of cinematic, it is mostly in my writing. It's very descriptive, very cinematic, and on a deep structure, it has the kind of architecture and narrative thrust of many good thriller and mystery movies. So in a sense, that's my connection. I don't have great hope that my books are made into movies. It'd be wonderful, but there is so much out there, so many projects that go before the producers that, it's hard to compete. Yeah.
All right, let's not think about that now. Let's talk about the book that you just it just came out, I understand, a few days ago. Rumor of Evil. So let's talk about that origin. What's the origin story of Rumor of Evil? How that come out?
Sure. As do many writers who write crime novels, I have a file of real life crimes that are disturbing or unusual or just plain bizarre. And one of them that stuck in my mind came out of 2014, out of Waukesha, Wisconsin. You might have heard of it. Two 12-year-old girls lured a 12-year-old girlfriend into the woods where they stabbed her 19 times. Luckily, she survived, but the two assailants are still in psychiatric institutions. I became fascinated. How could children do this to another child, such brutality? And that got me doing some research, and it connected me with studies of bullies and the bullied. And I was looking for a backstory to this novel. And because the opening scene, you have a woman hanging in her backyard, and the cops think this looks staged to me. So we have a potential murder investigation going on, but I wanted to connect it to a cold case from nearly 20 years ago. So the story of Slender Man gave me a profile of bullies who are kind of those alpha kids who want to appear smart, strong, and powerful to their friends. And they pick on someone who is kind of an outsider, someone who appears soft or looks different. She's too heavy, too thin, walks with a limp, and maybe from a different socioeconomic stratum, or they speak with an accent, or from a different ethnic or religious background. That is the outsider. And so I designed, for me, an outsider, a 16-year-old exchange student from Eastern Europe. She is of Roma extraction, from the dark-skinned northern Indian migration that came down 4 or 5 centuries ago and spread out through Europe. And she comes to affluent Lexington, Massachusetts, which is right next door to where I live here in Arlington, Massachusetts. And she's going to stay there for 4 months. She doesn't have cool clothes. She has strange kind of braids in the side of her head. But the kids have fun Americanizing her, introducing her to hot dogs and backyard barbecues and Mexican food. They take her to a rock concert. And because she is of Roma extraction, they think like gypsies. And at a pizza party, she begins to read palms. And then things turn very weird. And a few days later, friends and family of friends experience bad things. And the rumor, as in rumor of evil in the title, begin to spread. Isn't she a gypsy? And didn't the gypsies carry bubonic plague a long time ago? And don't they pray to Satan and drink the blood of Christian babies? And aren't they witches in disguise? So what I had done was tapped into all the derogatory myths about Romany people, and she became the victim in this novel. And she mysteriously dies in a fire in a treehouse in the backyard of that Lexington home, and that connects to the current story that the woman her suicide was staged as a cover up to that strange event 20 years ago. But it came from the Slender Man case in 2014 out of Wisconsin. So that's where it came from.
Yeah, that's interesting. You never know really where an idea can come from. One is watching something, one is living something, like in the case of your first book. Yes. You went through something there, you were doing that. Mm-hmm. When you get something that historically happened, what's your tendency to stick to reality as much as you can, or twist it as much as you can in the fantasy world of creating your own world, like that balance, right? But you can go into create the Tolkien, Middle Earth, or you can just stick with the urbanistic the reality or urban reality, or what you write. What's your balance there?
Don't let truth get in the way of good fiction.
I love that. I love that.
Exactly what you said, Marco. I let it go through my squeeze box in my head and my imagination, and I took it from there. Because 12-year-old kids, there's no motive that is clear. It's irrational what they did, and the adolescents in this novel, as in conspiracy theories, send out rumors to put down this outsider kid. So I just imagine what it'd be like. And I have 2 sons, and they passed through the adolescence, and I got to know their friends and how they talked. And having taught college for 45 years, I had freshmen who are just 2 years older than the victim in my novel and the other adolescents in the novel. So I got to know how they talk and how they think. And I just, use my imagination to create the scenarios of that story, of that poor young woman who was consumed by flames in a treehouse.
Yeah, because that sometimes is the risk when you're not telling a story that is where you are, or a projection of you as a male, a professor, writer, who you are, and you get into the mind and you create another character. There is a different gender or a different age. That's, I feel like, it's a really challenging part, especially nowadays when people are maybe not so forgiving about certain things. I mean, how do you know? How do I think? It's a challenge.
It is a challenge. I often draw from people I know, particularly my wife, for the major female character in the novel. And you're right. I mean, things have changed. In the last novel, and in this novel, the publisher hired sensitivity editors going through the book and making sure there are no insults to women, to minorities, I had one scene where I described a student in the class as being chubby, and they said, take out chubby, use a different word, because the chubby people out there might be insulted. You have to, and this is only the last 20 years, you have to know your audience quite well. You have to know your readership and what might be acceptable, what might not be acceptable. So one has to tweak one's own wording sometimes in a book. I think that's changes I've seen. Yeah.
I mean, it's a humble process too. I feel like you get to put as I say, walk in some other shoes instead of depicting a character the way that is in your head. And I talk a lot about generative artificial intelligence and the biases that come with the training of the algorithm. And I always like to say it's human. That's why it has faults. It carries all the biases that we carry from our culture, our history, and many times we don't know we have those. And there is no evil. Just to connect with the title, you don't wake up in the morning and you say, "Yeah, that's what I want to. That's what I want to do." It's the culture, and we are revising many things. Even when you look at Disney cartoons. Now they need to add certain things. And I think it's completely fair, and it's a way to look inside ourselves and who we are and be better as much as we can. During you're retired now from teaching, but is teaching shaped somehow the way that you write?
Yes. I learned how to read when I became a college professor of English. That means I learned how to look at another writer's work the way a carpenter looks at a house. When you're teaching a book, you really have to have it wired, because you're the one up in front of the room and you're sending stuff out to these students and hoping they connect to the book. So I learned how to read by not reading other people's books, but studying how they get in and out of scenes, how in a strip of 6 inches of dialogue, they're able to distinguish characters by the vocabulary, by the way they look, by how they pronounce their words or express themselves. I learned how you can, in an action novel, you alternate, how writers alternated an action scene with reflection scene, an action scene with fast and slow. As in movies, if there's a very robust kind of dramatic scene, is next scene they have is the cops or somebody talking about what happened. So you have this kind of up and down architecture in books. How authors end the scene with a cliffhanger. And this is what I learned in teaching other people's books. And that's what I try to pass on to my students. Look at the house the way a carpenter looks at it. See the angles, the agreement, the themes, and the economy. And so that's what I learned while teaching college English, how other writers did it. And in many ways, I try to emulate those strategies in my own works.
So now I'm going to think if it was Picasso or Dali or one of those guys, probably Picasso, that said, in order to break the rules, you need to know the rules. Yes. So you become yourself, and that applies to playing music, to do a lot of different kind of art. So connecting with what you said, how does somebody develop, and you developed your own style, but still trying to do it the right way, following the rule of writing that they worked. I mean, they worked for many writers before. Yeah. So you want to do that, but you want to keep your own spin. How do you do that?
Well, I know my own voice. I know what I think works as a sentence, or what works as a paragraph, or what works as a scene. The other stuff that I pick up from other people's writing is now instinctive. I mean, I know if a scene or a chapter is working. I know if there is too much exposition or too many technical details that might turn the readers blind or turn their blood into ink if you give too much, technical stuff. And I know, and research is very seductive. I mean, you learn a lot of cool things from the experts, and you want to put it in the book, but that's going to gum up the narrative thrust, the flow, and it's going to turn off readers and bore them. So you work up these instincts after. I mean, this is the 10th novel, and 2 more are done. So I know after a while that how I do it with my own voice, and that it complies with the best of the genre that I've learned from other folks. Yeah.
Right. So there is that peers comparison, inspiration, and making your own stories. But then there is the reader, the audience. So I'm assuming that after 10 book, I mean, when you write the first book, you may say, well, I don't really know who my reader is going to be. Or maybe you do have somebody in mind, like coming from advertising, you always think like, who's the target, right? So,
Right.
But a true artist, most of the time, as we were talking about before, try to express itself. But as you see the movie in your head, I feel like you also see the person reading the book. So I don't know, maybe it's my imagination. But so now after 10 book, did you develop an audience of readers and fans that maybe wasn't even, did you had idea that it was going to be that one? And do you know who reads your book now? And how does it affect your writing?
I think I do write for myself in many ways too. I have high standards, and I think I'm appealing to an intelligent reader who has high standards for the genres that I'm writing in, and doesn't want just a plot-driven novel, but they want a plot-driven novel that has well fleshed out characters. Because I know friends of mine, including my wife and people who are in book clubs, they like character. And in fact, I think more people who read mysteries are more interested in the character of the detective than the actual detection itself. You're not going to have a dope as a detective because you're not going to have a very interesting book. But you want to have a character of the detective, your protagonist of a novel, that you have sympathy with, empathy with, and someone you'd like to have a beer with or a coffee or spend a few hours with. And so the challenge is to come up with interesting protagonists in one's novel. And that's what I did. And part of that, Marco, is to give the main character, your protagonist in a novel, and the detectives in this novel here, personal baggage. That is, a detective has 2 quests. The outer public quest is trying to find the person who left that body in the opening scene. The personal quest, the inner quest, is I have got problems. Give them baggage, such as they're addicted to drugs, or they're alcoholic, or they feel guilty that they're estranged from their lover, their children, their best friend, or they feel guilty that their partner in the last murder scene was killed and you got away. So you give them some personal baggage that creates an empathy with the reader. They kind of feel for the guy. And I hope that by the end of the book, he or she is at a higher place than at the end, and got the bad guy too. So and that creates an intimacy with the reader if they feel empathy for them, as well as an interest. And so the character is the most important thing in my novels, even though I try to keep up the momentum of a page turner. Yeah. Wow,
it's interesting. I think people that are listening right now, they may get a lot of good tips from this. As we get towards the end, I'm curious about one more thing, because you wrote the book before and you mentioned it with another writer.
Yes.
And so that experience, I know I was reading that it's been done like through emails and going and developing. One took one side, one another side. how that works, because it's hard to find a book that it's written by multiple hands and brain and
right.
make a cohesive story, right?
Right. I have known Tess Gerritsen, who is an international best-selling author. I think she has 29 books out for about 25 or 30 years. And I taught a course in modern bestsellers, and she was a guest several times. And she plugged one or two of my books. So because she is a physician who has written medical thrillers, and because I wrote medical thrillers, we kind of were in the same genre, and we each respected each other's writing. We were at a Christmas party 4 or 5 years ago, and she said, "You want to write a book together?" I said, "Give me a nanosecond to think about this." I mean, she's brand name. So I proposed a storyline, which she liked. It was at the height of the Me Too movement, and famous American people were being disgraced, Harvey Weinstein and Matt Lauer from the Today Show, etc. And we both agreed that there are two sides to every illicit affair. So I suggested a college professor has an affair with one of his students. It's an old story, but we can put new wine in the old bottle. And over the course of 18 months, we wrote this book via emails and a few telephone calls. And we have similar styles, and we have similar strategies, and we meshed very well. But it's very interesting. Two-thirds of the book was done, and we had no idea who the villain was. We had, imagine that. We had 5 suspects, and we had to pick out one who would be the least suspicious to the readers. And then we finally decide, and you go right back to chapter 1, and you adjust everything, like dropping a pebble in a pond, all the ripples go out, adjusting everything so that the actual villain made sense to the readers when we finally rewrote the book to the end. But it was interesting. And I learned how women think, and she learned how men thought, because I did the male point of view chapter, she did the female point of view chapters, and it did very well, and it got great reviews. And what we loved is the reviewers in the Wall Street Journal said this was seamless. We could not tell who Gary Braver's chapters were or Tess Gerritsen's chapters. So that worked out well. Yeah. Had something to do. We got used to each other's style. Yeah.
You just answer an add-on question that I was going to have. Did it come out like the great dish because of the good ingredients, or can you still taste the separate ingredient? And you just said it came out very good. And I love how you kind of let the story develop itself, and then you went back and decide, okay, we don't even know who the character is.
Part of the reason, Marco, is that neither of us outlines anymore. When I first started, I had almost 100 pages of outline, and now we just sit down. It was a dark and stormy night, and go from there and see where we develop.
I love it. I love it. Well, this was a lovely conversation. I have many more questions, but I don't want to take any more of your time. And maybe you'll come back when you have your next book, or you want to just talk about storytelling in general. This is what we talk about here on Audio Signals. Sure. As far as the new book, why don't you finish with a couple of minutes or a minute of pitch for the book? I know it's Rumor of Evil. It already come out on October 10th. It's on Amazon and all of that, but I'll let you close. How about that?
I'm very proud of the book. It just got selected as the Amazon editor's top picks of the month of October. It's gotten rave reviews so far, and Book Lists and Publishers Weekly and the others. So it's getting great response. It's a fun book. It is character and plot driven. And if readers pick it up, I think they might enjoy it. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. And I look forward to coming back with you again, Marco. This was fun.
I would love that, and I am actually looking forward to get into the book myself. I'm more of a listener lately, because I can listen more while I do other things, so maybe they're audible. And this was great. I'm gonna,
and in case people are interested, you can find me on GaryBraver.com.
Yep, I was going to finish with that. There will be notes on the podcast as usual. The audience know that. Links to your social media if you want to share it, and your website, and of course to the book itself. And as far as the people that listen to me, I'm not writing right now, but you can subscribe. Stay tuned for other episodes on Audio Signal Podcast. And if you're on YouTube, yeah, we're not much to look at, but I think it was a good conversation. So at least we didn't make a movie out of it. But you'll be surprised how many people I hear said, I like to watch podcasts. And I'm like, I don't know. I like to listen to it. I'm an old school radio guy, but whatever fits you, subscribe. Gary, thank you so much. I had a really good time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Marco. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Audio Signals with Marco Ciappelli. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then add this show to your favorite podcast player, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to connect your brand to our conversations and our audience, visit itspmagazine.com to learn how to sponsor one or more of our shows. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey.